This story takes me back to my childhood in the rugged 90s, a time people around Jefferson City recall with mixed emotions, some warm and some grim. Kids like me from those days still get misty-eyed thinking about hours spent glued to Nintendo screens, trading pogs at recess, scarfing down hot fries from the corner store on Elm Street, racing through backyards, hammering together rickety forts from scrap wood, and sneaking into abandoned lots off Route 50. For our parents, however, it was a nightmare. No steady jobs existed, cash was scarce, and hope for a better tomorrow seemed like a distant dream. A few sharp hustling types managed to strike it rich in that chaos, raking in money while others struggled, but my folks weren't part of that lucky crowd. They scrambled for any gig they could find, desperate to put food on the table for themselves and us three wild kids, working themselves ragged day after day. Then one fateful day, Dad hit a small jackpot. He scored a night watchman job at the County Health Department building, perched on the outskirts of Hospital Hill, a sprawling patch of Jefferson City dotted with medical facilities. That same creepy area housed surgical units, maternity wards, and the city morgue, a forbidden zone for any kid caught snooping near it unless they wanted a thrashing from the gruff orderlies who patrolled the grounds. I still don't know what happened, but one gloomy afternoon, that low single-story morgue went up in flames and burned to a charred husk overnight. That sparked a wildfire of rumors among us kids on Maple Street, gruesome guesses we swapped like trading cards, each tale more twisted than the last. For 2 weeks straight, the stories grew wilder, fueled by our runaway imaginations. The toughest and most reckless boys started daring each other to sneak over there, returning with blood-curdling yarns about heaps of corpses strewn across the ruins, floors slick with crimson, and ghostly howls echoing from the basement's blackened depths. Did I buy into their tales? You're darn right I did. How could I not believe them? I was just 8 years old, a wide-eyed kid from Jefferson City who wouldn't dream of questioning the older boys from our block on Maple Street. My little brain, already buzzing with snippets of late-night horror movies I'd snuck peeks at on Channel 6, spun those stories into nightmares so vivid I could hardly shut my eyes at night without trembling under my quilt. Then summer break rolled in, that glorious stretch of freedom every kid lived for back then. No cell phones or fancy smartwatches existed. Our parents couldn't track us even if they wanted to, so we'd vanish into the streets from sunrise to sunset, tearing through alleyways and vacant lots, not even thinking about lunch. We just gulped icy water from the rusty spigot on Oak Avenue and snatched wild crabapples or chokecherries from bushes along the railroad tracks off Route 50. One evening, after a full day of running wild, I trudged home sweaty and sunburned, only to catch Dad lacing up his boots for his night shift at the health department. I was bored out of my skull. My older brother had claimed the Nintendo and our beat-up TV in the living room, and the second controller was, as always, fried beyond repair. No clue what got into me, but I blurted out a wild request: could I tag along to his shift? I didn't think he'd say yes. Honestly, I half expected a laugh or a flat, "No way," but to my shock, he shrugged and nodded. "Sure, why not?" he said with an amused glint in his eye. I scrambled into a hoodie and jeans, heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves, and in 2 minutes flat, we were out the door of our cramped apartment. 15 minutes later, after a quiet walk down Elm Street under flickering streetlights, we slipped through the back service entrance into the shadowy grounds of the health department building. I couldn't pin down what I felt stepping inside, perhaps curiosity or maybe dread. No idea waited behind those locked office doors. The long dim corridors of that 3-story brick beast stretched out before us, and our footsteps bounced off the walls with a hollow echo that sent a shiver racing down my spine. We set up camp in the break room, a dingy little space with a chipped formica table and a couple of wobbly chairs pulled from some storage closet. For hours, we went head-to-head in battleship, scratching grids onto crumpled graph paper from Dad's work bag, laughing and arguing over every hit and miss like it was a matter of life and death in our tiny world. When we finally called it quits, we brewed some hot tea in his dented thermos and dug into butter and sugar sandwiches, simple yet sweet and sticky, our go-to late-night snack that stuck to our fingers. Then it was time to crash for the night. Up on the second floor, tucked into a square nook off the hallway near a huge grimy window overlooking Hospital Hill, sat this massive creaky leather couch that slid out into a makeshift bed. We flopped onto it and propped our heads on puffy musty pillows that clung to our cheeks with every restless shift. You'd think I'd be out like a light after all that, but sleep wouldn't come for me. My 8-year-old mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and jitters, and my heart thumped loud enough to hear it pounding in my ears. All those spooky stories about the burned-out morgue from the kids on Maple Street kept replaying in my head, conjuring up every gory detail I'd cooked up since spring hit Jefferson City months ago. That place was close, too close, right there on Hospital Hill, part of the same eerie medical sprawl we were holed up in. I'd never set foot near it myself, so I hadn't a clue where it stood exactly or how many steps separated us from its ruins right at that moment. That unknown gnawed at me and ramped my pulse up higher with every passing second. I yanked Dad's jacket over my head, a shield against the hallway's chilly draft and my own runaway fears that wouldn't quit. I lasted maybe 5 minutes under there at most. Sweat beaded up and rolled down my face, not from warmth, but from the pure bone-deep panic my kid imagination churned out relentlessly. "Dad!" I hollered from under the jacket, my voice muffled but desperate, unable to wrestle those terrors alone anymore. "I'm scared." "What's the matter with you?" Dad grumbled, his voice thick with sleep as he stirred on the couch beside me. "There's nothing to be scared of in here, kid." "I want to go home," I whined, and my voice cracked into a pitiful sob that echoed faintly in the nook. "Please, can we just go home?" "Oh, come on now," he said, blinking awake and fixing me with a stern look, the kind he used when he meant business and wasn't budging an inch. I busted my hump for nearly a month to land this gig. "You want me canned? Then what? We sit around starving with nothing to eat? Get some shut-eye already. I can't sleep. There's dead bodies and blood all over the place," I stammered, parroting the wild rumors from the Maple Street crew word for word. That did it. I lost it completely and bawled like only a kid can, full of raw honest terror, every word I'd heard and every nightmare I'd spun feeling as real as the couch under me. "Dead bodies? Where?" Dad shot upright and scooped me into a bear hug, his eyes darting around the shadowy hallway like he expected something to lunge out from the corners. "What blood? What in the heck are you yammering about, son?" "In the morgue, the one that burned down," I sobbed, hiccuping through every syllable as tears streamed down my face. "The big kids said it's full of bodies and blood." "Good Lord," he huffed, letting out a relieved breath before easing me back from his chest. "I'd tan those little punks' hides if I could get my hands on them." "You ain't gonna rat out which ones, are you?" I shook my head, still sniffling, and dragged my sleeve across my runny nose to wipe it clean. "Hey, look at me," he said softer, musing up my hair with a rough hand. "Who do you trust more, me or those knuckleheads from the block? They ever been there for Rayal? Have you? Have you?" I asked, my sobs slowing as curiosity peeked through the fear. "Hundreds of times," he fibbed, not even twitching an eyelid to give it away. "Those kids? They're spinning yarns to look tough. No bodies, no blood, nada. But it's a morgue. Aren't there supposed to be dead folks in there?" I pressed, my 8-year-old logic kicking in despite the tears still stinging my eyes. "Man alive, where'd you pick up all this stuff?" Dad groaned, rubbing his tired eyes with the heels of his hands before hauling himself off the couch with a grunt. "All right, here's how we settle this. We're gonna march over there right now, and you can see it with your own 2 eyes. I'll light up a smoke while we're at it since I've been itching for one anyway." "No, please, let's not go. I'm not scared anymore, I swear. Let's just hit the hay," I pleaded, clutching at his sleeve as my voice wobbled with dread. If we don't go, you'll spend your whole darn life swallowing those block idiot stories and jumping at shadows, he shot back, firm as steel and unyielding. But if you come with me, he paused, scratching his stubbly chin, then grinned, if we spot even one single corpse, I'll buy you any Lego set your heart desires tomorrow, no kidding. I went stock still, and my tears dried up fast. A big Lego set? That was the holy grail for any kid in Jefferson City back then. They cost a fortune now, but in those penny-pinching days, you'd be lucky to unwrap a tiny kit on your birthday if at all. Fear duked it out with that dream in my chest, a tug-of-war between panic and possibility that played out in seconds. No surprise which side won. I was hooked. Dad knew he wasn't risking squat. He'd seen the place a million times, he figured, and this would teach me a lesson I'd carry forever. But even with that shiny prize dangling in front of me, I was scared stiff. My legs felt like jelly, sweat soaked through my hoodie, and all I could think was we shouldn't be doing this. No rhyme or reason existed, just a gut-deep certainty that one glimpse of a body and we'd be toast. Even knowing every kid who'd bragged about sneaking to the morgue came back alive, not a nick on them, I still tried weaseling out of the deal more than once, my sneakers dragging on the linoleum as we stood by the door. But Dad had me locked in tight with that Lego bait. Saw this beauty at the store on Main Street, a spaceship set, huge and sleek, he said, stretching his arms wide like he was showing off a prize catch from the Missouri River. This big, kid. Can you picture it on your shelf? My heart raced, and I shuffled another step behind him, then another, each one heavier than the last despite my pounding excitement. Summer in Jefferson City was a scorcher that year, sticky and humid, but Dad still draped his beat-up jacket over my shoulders to keep off the night chill that crept in. He fished a cigarette from his pack, struck a match with a quick flick, and sparked up his flashlight, the only gear the health department brass had bothered to give him for the job. "Ready to roll, champ?" he asked, a sly grin curling his lips as he puffed out a cloud of sharp bitter smoke into the still air. I shook my head hard, eyes pleading, but he just chuckled and gave me a gentle shove off the porch step. He locked the service door behind us and wedged a matchstick at an angle in the corner, calling it our alarm. "If it's down when we get back, it means some crook slipped in while we were gone, and we'll call the cops pronto," he explained with a wink. Outside, it was that eerie hour when the sun vanished completely, leaving Hospital Hill swallowed in thick inky dark. Our footsteps clacked in sync on the cracked pavement and echoed off the brick walls around us. I latched onto his arm like it was the only thing keeping me afloat, gripping tight the whole way. I didn't know a lick of prayers, begging fell flat, and the Lego hype fizzled fast under the weight of my nerves. So Dad half-dragged me along Route 50's shoulder, muttering reassurances. "Ain't nothing bad out there, kid. We'll be back snoozing in no time," he promised. The walk wasn't far, thank heavens, just 5 minutes, though I'd have sold my soul to stretch it into forever. Anything to delay facing that place, the pitch-black night, the looming shadows of Hospital Hill's old buildings, the rustling trees off the path. I'd take it all over what waited ahead. "Here we are, buddy," Dad said, flashing a toothy grin as he swung the flashlight beam onto a crumbling roofless shell of a building, its brick walls scarred and ancient from years of neglect. "No need to fret. We ain't stepping inside. You can see plenty from right here," he assured me. My whole body started quaking, and sweaty hands clamped harder onto his as my breath hitched. The light jittered across the morgue's fire-ravaged window frames, their bars bent and blackened, showing glimpses of a chaotic pitch-dark interior that looked straight out of a kid's worst nightmare. One window, 2, 3. We sidestepped along the perimeter and moved off the gravel path onto patchy grass under a gnarled oak that creaked in the breeze. My knees knocked together, my bladder screamed for relief, but I couldn't peel my eyes off that beam, like some hypnotized fool caught in a trance. We checked the last window, then a rusted steel door warped shut, and finally the caved-in roof, half melted into the guts of the place. Had your fill yet? Dad asked, lowering the flashlight from the wreckage above us. I tracked the light down and let out a scream that could have woken half of Jefferson City. Two pale unblinking eyes glared back at me through the bars, cold and lifeless in their stare. Dad flinched hard, the flashlight slipped from his grip and clattered to the ground, snapping my gaze away from whatever hellish thing I'd locked eyes with out there. My kid brain blanked it out fast, leaving just those ghostly eyes seared into my skull like a brand. That scream of mine melted into loud messy sobs, then spiraled into a full-on meltdown, tears and snot streaking down my face as I gasped for air. Dad fumbled for the fallen flashlight, snatched it up off the dirt, and tried everything to settle me down, starting with soft words about it being okay, then explanations about shadows and tricks of the light, even a grumbled threat of a timeout if I didn't quit hollering my head off. None of it stuck. I thrashed and wailed, begging to bolt back to our apartment on Maple Street, yelling that we had to run before the morgue's corpse came after us with teeth bared and ready to chomp us both. No use. Dad wasn't budging an inch. He grabbed my arm and hauled me back toward the health department, my sneakers scuffing the pavement the whole way as I dragged my feet. I don't hold it against him now. I can see how unhinged I must have looked, a sweaty screaming mess, but back then, it felt like betrayal through and through. 10 minutes later, we were parked back in the break room, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead like an angry wasp. Dad poured me a mug of hot tea from the thermos and pushed it into my shaky hands, pressing me gently. "What did you see out there, huh? What's got you yelling like that?" All I could manage was sipping that scalding tea, lips trembling, my mind stuck on that cursed window and those piercing white eyes boring into me like needles. An hour crawled by, and as the first hints of dawn peeked through the blinds, the terror started to loosen its grip at last. Dad kept saying it was all in my head, and it began to sink in slowly. We were still breathing. No shambling dead broke down the door like in those zombie flicks I'd caught glimpses of on Channel 6. Maybe he had a point after all. He flat out refused to pony up for the Lego set since he hadn't seen a thing himself, which stung. I sulked hard, but worn out, I collapsed back on the couch under his jacket and passed out the second my head hit those lumpy pillows. Something jolted me awake, a sharp grating noise like a nail dragging across glass, cutting through the quiet of the building. I wriggled out from under Dad's jacket and blinked into the gloom of the second-floor hallway, my breath catching as I scanned for the source of that awful sound. Then my eyes hit the big window at the end of the nook. Nothing but thick suffocating night stretched outside, and there they were again, those white eyes glowing like twin moons, staring right through me with an icy chill. This time, long matted black hair spilled over most of its face, leaving just those eerie peepers and a sliver of pale skin visible in the dark. A bony hand with jagged coal-black nails scratched at the glass, slow and deliberate, sending a shudder down my spine. I let out a shriek that could have shattered the panes myself and watched, horrified, as that thing, that walking corpse, flashed a wide toothy grin before ducking its head out of sight and vanishing into the shadows beyond. I whirled to shake Dad awake, needing him right then more than ever, but the couch was empty beside me. He was gone. That hit me like a freight train, pure terror flooding every inch of my 8-year-old self in an instant. Alone in this creepy echoing building, miles from our safe little apartment on Maple Street, with some dead thing prowling outside hungry for me, I'll never shake that feeling as long as I live. "Dad! Daddy, where are you?" I bellowed, my voice bouncing off the walls, but all I got back was a faint mocking echo that made it worse. Tears streamed hot down my cheeks, my body seized up in a vice of panic so tight I couldn't even think about running. Standing up from that couch felt like climbing a mountain with no rope. "He'll pop up any second," I told myself, clinging to hope. He probably just hit the john or stepped out for a quick smoke on the porch like he sometimes did. But 1 minute stretched into 2, then 3, and still no Dad showed up. Glance back at that window? Not unless someone wrestled my head around and pried my eyelids open with pliers. I wasn't chancing those eyes again for anything. Then it came, that sickening screech, softer now, muffled like it was seeping from one of the locked offices down the hall near the stairwell. A beat of silence followed, then it scratched again, sharp and close, sending every hair on my neck standing straight up in alarm. I yanked the jacket over my head, curled into a ball, and sobbed like a baby, my chest heaving. Then, crash! Glass exploded right behind me, the sound splitting the air like a thunderclap. I froze solid, breath locked in my chest, ears straining for every whisper of noise in the dark. Through the thin wall, I heard it. Something heavy tumbled through the busted window and landed with a thud that shook the floor. Shuffling steps followed, slow and uneven, with faint tinkles of glass scattering across the tiles. It was inside the building now, loose in the health department with me alone. That thought snapped me out of it. My body kicked into gear on its own accord. I sprang up and bolted blind, no idea where I was headed, just away from the rattling doorknob as that thing clawed at a locked room behind me. My sneakers pounded the tiles until I hit the stairwell. Dad could be outside. I tore downstairs and plunged into pitch blackness, no flashlight to guide me through the gloom. I slammed into something solid, a yelp of pain and fear ripped out as I crumpled, then crawled forward, only to bash my forehead into something harder still with a sickening thud. It was a desk or cabinet, something with a gap underneath big enough to hide in. I wedged myself in and slapped both hands over my mouth to muffle my chattering teeth, barely daring to breathe as I huddled there. I went still as stone, every sense tuned to the dark, straining for any hint of what was out there lurking. Then I heard it, slapping, shuffling footsteps, bare and wet sounding, echoing down the stairwell toward me. I swallowed a scream, but it took everything I had. Tears poured silently down my face and soaked my collar as my heart raced. My kid brain hit a wall of despair so thick I'd have welcomed death right then, anything to dodge the jaws and claws of that shambling corpse I knew was hunting me down. I tried willing it, pictured my heart stopping, even begged God like I'd seen in movies on Channel 6, but no luck came my way. I was still alive, trapped, listening as those slow taunting steps hit the first floor with a slap. It wasn't rushing, just creeping along like it enjoyed dragging out my terror for fun. My mind raced and painted vivid scenes of jagged teeth tearing into me. I could almost feel the agony, but it stayed a ghost pain and never landed. The thing stopped right by my hiding spot. I could sense it looming overhead. This is the end, I thought, my chest tight with dread. Then I couldn't hold it. A shaky breath slipped out, and in that split second, icy fingers clamped around my ankle and yanked hard. My scream tore loose, shrill and wild, dissolving into a squeal like a stuck pig as it pulled me into the open with brutal force. Those claws sank deep and shredded my skin, making me scream louder, voice echoing off the health department's cold walls like a siren. It dragged me out from under the desk, slow and deliberate, its shuffling steps scraping the tiles as it towed me through the suffocating dark with no mercy. Tears blinded me, my throat burned raw, and screams faded into hoarse choking sobs that shook my whole body. My back scraped across debris littering the floor, bits of plaster and broken glass, leaving stinging trails while my leg, gripped tight in its bony hand, went numb from sheer panic that overwhelmed me. My 8-year-old mind couldn't keep up. Reality flickered in and out, leaving me with disjointed flashes of pain and fear raking my whole body like claws of their own. I snapped awake on a freezing floor, surrounded by blackened walls, green light spilling through shattered barred windows overhead into the gloom. The truth hit like a sledgehammer. I was inside the morgue, the very ruin I'd gawked at from afar on Hospital Hill all those nights. That kicked up a fresh wave of dread, so thick it shook me to my core, my kid frame trembling uncontrollably as I gasped. I staggered to my feet, collapsed, then clawed my way up and leaned hard on the sooty wall for support. My hands came away smeared black. The old fire had painted this awful place in grim ashy streaks and made it feel even more like a tomb closing in. I bit my lip to keep quiet, one hand braced on the charred wall, and limped out of the room where I'd come to, my only thought escaping this nightmare and racing back to Mom, who'd be pacing our apartment on Maple Street, worried sick by now without a doubt. I reached a scorched doorframe and peered through its barred window slit into the night. Outside, a blinding green glow washed out everything. No glimpse of Route 50, no trees, no houses, just that unnatural light seared my eyes and left me blind. Fresh tears welled up, but I pushed on and hobbled into a long hallway that forked left and right from a glowing window at the center of it all. Which way out? No signs or clues existed, just my thumping heart and ragged breaths filling the silence. I glanced right and screamed again, a raw ragged sound that tore from my throat. There it stood, a towering shadow at the hall concept's far end, half hidden in the dark beyond the light's reach out there. Nearly brushing the ceiling, draped in a tattered singed robe, its black hair hung like a curtain over a face I couldn't see, except for those stark white eyes locked on me, unblinking and cold. I spun left and lurched away, dragging my bad leg as fast as I could muster, when those familiar barefoot slaps echoed behind me in pursuit. Terror fueled me and propelled me through twisting corridors, pitch-black stretches, and blind turns, anything to outrun that thing and the death it promised me. Why I wasn't dead yet didn't register. Raw animal fear scrubbed every shred of reason from my head before it could even form a single thought. Adrenaline surged and pushed my battered body harder than I thought possible. I risked a look back just as it stepped into the window's green glare. A wide rotten grin split its soot-streaked scabbed face and peeked through a tangle of greasy hair that hung low. My voice was gone, but the sight sent a shiver ripping through me like ice water. Another patch of green light shone ahead, then back into choking darkness. The morgue was a twisted maze, every corner a potential dead end that could trap me. No clue how long that chase dragged on. To my kid self, it stretched into a lifetime, each second dripping with dread that weighed me down. I clung to the wall and limped fast as my throbbing leg allowed, when the support vanished. I pitched forward and tumbled down hard, bouncing off what felt like concrete steps that bruised me. Every jolt hammered my bones, but I dragged myself up on my elbows and gasped for air. Then I saw where I'd landed, and my mind swam with panic. A cavernous room sprawled before me, bathed in a sickly red glow from some unseen source, the floor awash in blood, thick dark pools of it everywhere. Corpses littered the space, some leaking red rivers, others half submerged in the mess like drowned rats. My hands, sliced up from the fall, oozed my own blood and stained the floor beneath me. Then the bodies twitched, jerky unnatural spasms like broken marionettes, forcing them upright. One by one, they turned, hollow eyes fixing on me with a lifeless stare. Pure primal terror ripped a scream from my gut, louder than I'd ever yelled in my 8 years, reverberating off the blood-soaked walls like a siren's wail. Dozens of cold dead hands lunged for me and clawed at my arms and legs with relentless grip. I flailed and swung wild, then a sharp smack stung my cheek out of nowhere. "Wake up, darn it! Wake up!" Dad's voice roared and cut through the haze as he shook me hard by the shoulders. "Look at me, kid, look," he barked, his face inches from mine, eyes wide with worry. "It's just a nightmare. You had a rotten dream. What's gotten into you? Dad?" I croaked, trembling head to toe, not trusting my own eyes as I blinked at him. "Who else, you little terror," he said, his voice shaky, eyes brimming with worry and relief that I was okay. "You're fine, just a bad one. Took me 5 blasted minutes to snap you out of it. Look at this, you clawed me good, strong as an ox." There were dead people everywhere, I whimpered, drenched in sweat and shaking like I'd been dunked in the Missouri River in January. "Easy now," he murmured and pulled me into a tight hug that steadied me. "Your brain's just too darn creative, that's all." We stayed like that 5 minutes, me hiccuping through sobs and spilling every twisted detail of the worst dream I'd ever had in my life. "All right, up you go. Let's get some tea," he said finally and cast a wary glance out the window before hoisting me to my feet gently. "We'll head home soon, promise." After that night, sleep dodged me for days, 2 or maybe 3 at least. No amount of mom and dad's soothing words about dreams staying dreams could shake the heebie-jeebies clinging to me like damp fog. When mom found out dad had dragged me to the old morgue on Hospital Hill in the dead of night, she lit into him like a tornado tearing through Jefferson City's quiet streets. Her yelling echoed through our apartment on Maple Street so fierce I almost felt bad for him, almost, but not quite enough to let it go entirely. Those white eyes still haunt my dreams now and then, popping up uninvited when I least expect them, though they don't rattle me like they used to years ago. I've talked myself into thinking maybe I did see a ghost that night. It could be it even sparked the fire that torched the place long before. Can't prove it, though, and who cares anyway? What's it gonna do, haunt me worse than it already has? A few years later, once I'd grown some guts, I hiked back to that burned-out husk solo, chasing answers to questions that nagged me for ages after. I stood there on Route 50, staring at those charred window frames, but nothing stared back, no eyes, no spooks, zilch. Disappointing? Maybe a little. Relieving? You bet it was.